Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes. If you've been enjoying the show, please do consider contributing to our crowdfunding campaign on the website Patreon.
For as little as $2 a month, you can get a great range of rewards, the best of which is a collection of magazine pictures from Simon, myself, and previous co-hosts of the show.
We'd also like to give a shout out to our most recent Patreon, who is Tom Wentworth. So Tom is an aspiring screenwriter. His most recent project is a monologue called The Real Deal for the BBC4, BBC America series Crypt Tales. And he also has a background doing some journalism as well.
Thanks very much for supporting the show, Tom. Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes. In this episode, we speak to Phoebe Hurst, the managing editor of Vice UK.
Rachel and I spoke with Phoebe about working at Vice, about dealing with new writers, and about modulating the famous Vice voice.
It's a great episode. We hope you enjoy it. Hi, Phoebe, and welcome to Always Take Notes. Could we start with your work at Vice? What does the average day of a managing editor look like?
Yeah, good question, because I think something I find really fun about my role is it's very varied and it involves a lot of different kind of facets of being an editor. Our kind of day starts with a morning meeting. So before COVID, we would obviously do this in the office. But now, like lots of people, we're confined to our homes. So that morning meeting is really just a time for all the editorial team at Vice to come together and just talk about what we're working on for the day. So usually one of my colleagues will lead this and we'll kind of just go around and catch up on big pieces that people are doing, what they expect to publish today. And then we kind of break off for the side of the team who cover more of the kind of newsy stuff to discuss what they'll be covering. Because often if there's something that's kind of like breaking news or something we've spotted that morning, we'll want to talk about how we can cover that from a Vicey angle. So I guess as the managing editor kind of in those meetings, I'll be the one who's kind of figuring out, what do we need to publish today? What are we going to be holding for tomorrow? And just having that kind of bird's eye view over the week ahead. So yeah, that's kind of how the mornings start. And then from there, I do a lot of editing and commissioning still, which is something I really enjoy. So often I'll be, looking at a piece from a freelancer or editing pieces from the staff writers who I manage as well. So we have 3 staff writers at Vice at the moment. So I'll be kind of looking at their work if they're having something that is being handed in on that day and kind of suggesting edits and things like that. So yeah, that obviously takes up quite a bulk of the day doing that part of it. And then I guess other stuff can be sort of planning meetings, thinking about any big campaigns or series that we might want to do on Vice and talking to the other senior editors about that too. So yeah, kind of lots of stuff going on, but I guess the core is kind of that planning element and then also doing the editing as well and commissioning too.
And Phoebe, what's the division between London and the rest of the world? And are you managing editor for the UK or is it wider? And how does the interface between your sort of empire and the rest of Vice work?
Yeah, I think that's a good question because Vice on the outside is obviously this quite huge entity. And we do have offices all over the world. I've kind of lost track of how many places we have offices. But yeah, the London office is where I'm based. And yeah, I'm the managing editor of the UK arm of Vice. But I do have kind of constant contact with my managing editor counterpart in the US as well. And we're obviously, we do kind of weekly calls with the US team to see what they have coming up too, especially on the news side of things, because obviously there can be a lot of crossover there. But yeah, I'm just looking after the UK stuff. But it's really exciting to see what the other kind of offices are working on as well, because we do have people kind of based everywhere. And in recent years, we've been trying to improve the way that we translate articles as well. So if there's been an article that's gone viral in Italy and it seems like it will have universal appeal, we'll try and think of ways to get that translated and tied into another piece for an English speaking audience. So yeah, I think that's one of the benefits of working in an organization that does have that global outlook.
And in terms of the things that you're commissioning, what are you looking for in an article? I think I read somewhere that the 26 of Vice readers are under the age of 24. How much do you bear that sort of thing in mind when you're commissioning?
Yeah, I'm not sure of the specific demographics of how old our audience is, but I know our audience is definitely millennials and Gen Z as well. So I feel like that is really important to us for everything that we're covering. Because I think it's kind of quite rare as well. Like there aren't really that many media organizations that really can cater to like the younger audience like we do. So it's definitely at the heart of everything we try and cover. Like, if we're covering a huge topic like coronavirus, like unemployment, then we want to think like, well, what's the way in that matters to our readers? So we might look at something like the recent like ONS figures that showed that like young people are more likely to lose their jobs during COVID. Just like thinking of ways that make it interesting for like someone who's actually reading it, who is in their like 20s or early 30s. Because that's really what Vice is about. I think just like having this youth lens on stories and showing like a voice that you might not get if you're reading the same story on like The Guardian or the Times or something like that.
And how is that reflected in the demographic of the people in the offices? We understand that the age of the staff is average age in their 20s as well. I mean, I've always been quite fascinated. Like, what happens when you get too old? Like, are you cold, or like how does that work?
Yeah, when you reach 30, you have to like go outside and just quietly be taken away to a farm somewhere. It is like a young editorial team, definitely compared to, I guess, some of the more established like news organizations and media organizations. And I think that's like a strength really. Like it's really cool to have lots of young people like doing interesting things in an editorial sense. And it's something that, lots of people at Vice, me included, like I've been at Vice for 5 years now. And lots of my colleagues have been here for like a number of years as well. So I think we are, we're all inevitably getting older, but at the same time, we're really keen to like work with new writers, and we always try and like, well, before coronavirus, we would try and offer like work experience and things like that when we could. So I think we definitely want to like make sure that we're still serving young people whilst also knowing that like, some of us might be like not so young anymore, but still wanting to do that.
Who's the oldest person?
I don't know if I would like to out them as the oldest person at Vice. But no, there's a whole range of like people who work at Vice. Vice isn't just like the editorial team. Like obviously we have loads of different departments as well, and lots of different people of different ages. So while we're definitely like a youth kind of focused place, it's not like we ban old people or anything.
No entry over a certain threshold.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned working with new writers. Firstly, how do you go about finding them? Is it just sort of them pitching to you? And also once you've commissioned them, how do you go about sort of developing them and getting them to the point where the article is ready to be published?
Yeah, pitching is a really big one, I think. I've definitely started having like good relationships with writers who just kind of pitched me, who I didn't know about first of all, and they were kind of at the beginning of their careers, and they just obviously turned out to be good writers, and we've like maintained that relationship. So yeah, I think pitching is a really big one, and I think because we are quite open to like new voices, and we want to make sure that we're getting like a range of people represented on Vice. I think editors here are quite open to, working with new writers, maybe in a way that other places wouldn't be, just because of, like traditions or how they work. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm always open to like hearing pitches from new writers. I think Twitter is a really big one as well. Like, as anyone who's listening who's like in journalism will know, like Twitter is definitely, it's like the water cooler where everybody goes who's kind of in this industry. So I think if you are like a new writer and you are kind of building up bylines, it's really good to have like a Twitter profile to be sharing that stuff and, kind of in those conversations. Whilst obviously it's no substitute for actually, doing the work and like having good ideas and being able to write well. Like it's definitely useful in terms of visibility for new editors, I think. So yeah, I think Twitter is really big as well, just to like get a feel of who's out there and who's doing new stuff. And then what else? I kind of try and do things with like students when I can, like when those opportunities are there. So at Vice, we've done a few things with like some universities who are kind of like based in London and doing journalism stuff. So we'll try and do like talks with their students just to give them an idea of like what Vice is looking for. Because I definitely see it as like a two-way street, really. Like we need new ideas and we need writers who are good, and like the writers who are out there and want to pitch to Vice need that as well. So it's definitely like something that can go both ways, I think.
And how much content are you putting out a day. We've got this extraordinary stat that we found that across Vice is putting out 1,700 things. How is it all coordinated? And are you aiming for a certain tempo, or is it depending what's going on in the news cycle and stuff like that? And I suppose what's the division between quite reactive sort of on the day stuff and longer projects?
Yeah, I'm not sure like exactly how many pieces Vice puts out kind of across every platform and every territory. But I know in the UK we kind of have a division between the news pieces that we're putting out. So for news stuff, often that can be kind of more reactionary things, because we might see, like for example, today it was in the news that QAnon has been like banned from Facebook. So that's something that's kind of relevant to our readers. So we did a piece about that, which was kind of a bit more reactionary, but we got kind of Ruby Lavinia, who wrote it, got comment from Hope Not Hate and an academic. So, that's kind of a quick turnaround piece that would go up in the morning, but it's not, something without substance there. So we usually have kind of one or two pieces like that are kind of faster turnaround a day for the news side, and then maybe like three more that are more, longer, like reported features. And then for the kind of lifestyle and culture side, that's, those kind of stories tend to be less like, breaking news and timely. So that can kind of vary depending on what stuff we have coming up. But yeah, it's definitely like a lot of stuff that we put out every day, I think, especially because our team isn't like huge. There's about a dozen of us, I think. So yeah, we do try to plan ahead and like think about the best times to publish stuff and try and have that, look at the week ahead and how we can do that. But yeah, that's kind of what we aim for each day. And obviously we discuss that when we're doing our morning meetings and things like that.
So how many of those pieces, how many would you be sort of juggling at one time, and what system do you have for keeping track of everything?
Yeah, we have a couple of systems. We have this program called DeskNet that I don't know if it's, how well used it is in other places as well, but it's basically just like a big planning board that you can kind of like assign stories to and, move them around when they're going around. And then in terms of like me personally, like managing, editing as well as doing that planning stuff and the more strategic stuff, I feel like I like to kind of break my day up a bit and just see the morning as the time when I'm kind of like editing pieces or working with staff writers if they're doing a piece that needs to come out that morning. So kind of the stuff that takes like a bit more concentration, I try to do first thing. And then the other stuff that's more like planning, try and kind of do that in the second part of the day. But obviously that can change depending on things that are coming through and all of that kind of stuff.
And what has happened with the kind of course and progress of Vice in recent years? I mean, I remember, say, about 5 years ago, not just with Vice, but with BuzzFeed and Vox and other sort of digital media platforms, really having a day, lots of investment, lots of resources, lots of hiring. And then, there's been elements of retrenchment and stuff like that elsewhere. How is the amount of, I suppose, the amount of money available for the work you're doing now compared to what it was over the 5 years that you've been at Vice?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think, the kind of, the burst of like new media, like unicorn, that era of like new websites coming through, I think is definitely petered out a bit now. And like Vice definitely isn't alone. Like BuzzFeed has also suffered from a similar kind of thing. So I think there is definitely a difference in terms of like how Vice and other sites like it are viewed, more widely in media. Like it's maybe not viewed as like, the same site that it was back then. But I think in terms of like day-to-day of what we do on the editorial team, I'm not sure if that much has changed, because, we're still, back then we were still committed to doing stories that like speak to our readers and, good reporting and thinking of interesting ways into stories that other people have done. And we're still doing largely the same work now. I guess changes more recently have been kind of, coronavirus related. Like we did have some issues with our budget earlier this year, but, currently we're able to publish all the stories that we want to. And it's kind of, we're still working to those same standards.
Do you mind me asking how much you pay your freelancers and what the rates are?
Yeah, so the minimum rate would be 25p per word, but that can obviously change depending on like the amount of reporting and work needed for a story. So that's obviously negotiable. But yeah, that's kind of the rate that we start with.
And has that been the same over recent years, or are the sort of belts tighter now than they were before?
No, that's like the word rate is something that we kind of continue monitoring and making sure it's in line with like, benchmarking with other organizations. So yeah, it hasn't like gone down since I've started working at Vice, at least. And it's something that we will continue looking at, because yeah, obviously the freelancers are really important to us. We want to make sure they're being paid fairly for their work.
And what can you take it up to? I mean, what's the sort of upper threshold with that?
I'm not sure what the it's really hard because it like depends on what kind of piece it is and like, the time frame for a piece as well. So it's really like, yeah, it just really depends like piece to piece. So it's hard to say.
Could I ask sort of more generally about the voice of Vice? I know that the kind of style of journalism, gonzo-ish, is called immersionism at Vice, but how long did it take you to get used to writing in the Vice style? And if you can try and describe it, how would you do that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's another good question because, yeah, I think Vice does have quite a specific style and it still does. I think even more so when I started writing for Vice, which was like, I actually started when I was an intern, so like back in uni. So when I was in my second year of university, I did an internship at Vice, and that was like quite a few years ago now. So I think the Vice like brand that people think of, the kind of stereotypical like gonzo, really immersing yourself in these mad situations, like that was much more at the forefront of what we did. Mm-hmm. So yeah, back then it was much more like that. So I don't know. I think like any kind of learning a writing style, I think I just read a lot of the website, like, just reading every single article, comparing, one writer's style to another writer's style and seeing what kind of like the common threads there are that are there. So I think that really helped. And yeah, I think the main thing is just, trying to have that like authenticity, trying to have that humor. I think that makes a Vice style as well. But not being like too earnest, I think, as well. And yeah, just making sure that like, what the story is and you're speaking to the people who are kind of at the center of that story. So whether it's like a really wild, event that you went to, or whether it's a more serious, like focused news story, just making sure you have their voices in there and they're being centered, I think is really good. But yeah, I think Vice is also interesting too, because we definitely allow space for writers to kind of have their own voice as well. And, we don't want everybody to sound exactly the same. Like we're quite happy for writers if they're good and they have a strong voice. We want to like develop that and make sure it's something that shines through.
Can we talk about developing new writers and how, you've mentioned a bit about, the willingness that Vice has to deal with first timers and things like that. How much time are you kind of happy to give to something like this? And do you have a process for, I don't know what the right phrase is, breaking someone in or, kind of training, as it were, to get them to do that? And maybe if you give a couple of examples of a way that's worked very well, and then maybe another situation that's been more challenging. I mean, I think it's so interesting because no one ever tells you how to do this, right? Yeah. Often that's so much the experience of freelance writing. What does it look like from your side, and what are the to dos and what are the to don'ts?
Yeah, I think it is really like I found that definitely when I started freelancing, I had no idea, like I didn't really know what a pitch was or like who you needed to send it to or like what the courtesy was there. So it's one of those funny things that kind of when you know, but before that it's just like being completely blocked outside. So yeah, I guess the process in terms of like making sure a new writer can kind of have those opportunities. I don't know, it's hard because you kind of need to just like have a lot of resilience when you're like a new freelancer or someone who's a student who wants to pitch, in terms of just trying again and again. Like your first pitch probably won't be quite right, but you keep doing it and you keep reading the website and you'll kind of learn what's going to work. So I guess in terms of like what I know I try to do and lots of my colleagues do as editors is just trying to be patient with these new writers who their first piece of their file might not be quite right, but they have that enthusiasm there, and they're obviously, they understand what the Vice kind of tone of voice is. Kind of going back to what we were saying before, like if somebody kind of understands what Vice is about and kind of wants to really do those kind of stories, then I know that I'd definitely be really keen to hear from them and keen to kind of work with them in a way. But yeah, for like the nuts and bolts of how you kind of can break in a new writer, I guess it's just the quite boring stuff of, when their pitch is sent in, I just, try and give some productive feedback, although sometimes it's a bit hard to go very in depth because of the number of pitches that you receive. But yeah, trying to give productive feedback. And then if I have commissioned something from someone new, I'll try and give really detailed edits that are helpful, which is, I think, the most helpful thing. I know that when I was starting out, it was just really, really good to get feedback on anything, even if it was quite harsh and it meant I had to rewrite everything. I think that's the most useful thing and most valuable thing you can have when you're new, is just having edits that are helpful and suggestions. So yeah, I think that's really important.
So I'm guessing you're taking the time to explain why you've made the changes or why you've made the suggestions that you have.
Yeah, because like you said, that's the other thing. It does take a lot of time to do this. So it's definitely a decision you kind of have to make. If I'm looking at all the pictures that came in, in a week, I'll kind of have to decide, okay, this one might take a bit longer to work with, but, this person seems like they have a really good idea. They seem really keen to go out and speak to people. They're going to file on time. We can take a chance on that. And yeah, we've done that before with previous people who've pitched to Vice or who maybe came on board as work experience students back when we were able to do that. And it's been really nice to kind of watch them grow as writers, I guess. And that kind of came down to them just being really enthusiastic and wanting to pitch and wanting to write these stories. So yeah, I think Vice is a good place for that kind of stuff. But yeah, it does take time for sure.
What kind of volume of pitches are you getting a week? And are you the person? Are you the person that, say, if there are listeners who are interested in getting in touch with an idea, they should come to you? How much of this stuff do you get?
Yeah, I'm definitely not the only person. My inbox would go mad if that was the case. No, all the editors on the Vice team, everybody receives pitches, and everybody has a kind of different beat or a different interest. So if you're kind of following all my colleagues on Twitter and looking at the stuff that they're publishing, then you can get a really good idea of which person your pitch might sit best with. So yeah, if you're interested in pitching, I would probably say to do that first. Just do a bit of research about who's publishing what and where their interests are. So yeah, we all kind of receive pitches and have writers that we work with. Everyone on the team also writes as well. So I think everybody's got that balance between commissioning and editing and also writing pieces too. So yeah, I couldn't say what the volume is that we get in total, but the pitches are something that we review every week, and yeah, we're regularly looking at the stuff people are sending in.
This is a great segue to my next question, which is about your own writing. I mean, you, in your sort of breakdown of your day, you talk mostly about commissioning and sort of liaising with other staff members and all the sort of administrative and editing side of stuff. How much time would you get to spend in an average week on your own journalism?
Probably not as much time as I would like to. I don't know. It's really strange because I really love editing and commissioning and working with writers. And I really enjoy all the other kind of, I guess, admin related things that kind of go into running or helping to run an editorial team. So yeah, it kind of goes in waves, really. I feel towards the beginning of the year, I was writing a bit more, but then because of coronavirus related stuff and kind of other shifts, I've ended up doing a bit more kind of editing and commissioning now. But yeah, I think I would like to have, I know I've been listening to other episodes you've done with other journalists who have a much more rigorous way of I don't know, doing, writing on this day and then editing on that day. I'd like to maybe get more towards that because yeah, it's really fun editing other people's work, but I do miss kind of doing a bit more of the writing as well. So I think I need to get better at doing that.
So we wanted to dive in to talk about Pret in a moment, but there was just one kind of broader question about the business model of Vice. How does it work? How is it funded? Via advertising, licensing? How does the thing kind of work financially?
I mean, I just work on the editorial team, so I don't have that much insight into kind of the breakdown of the business side of things, because they're both kept quite separate, obviously. But yeah, as far as I can kind of explain it, it would be kind of advertising, and then Vice has other arms to the company as well that do that kind of stuff too.
Diving into the Pret piece, you wrote a sort of, I guess, an oral history of how the coffee shop came to take over basically London. How did that idea come about, and how did you report it? Were Pret difficult to get access to, and how many people did you interview, and sort of the whole nuts and bolts of how you put that piece together?
Yeah, that was an interesting piece to put together. I think it came about because it was sort of the end of 2019, so end of the decade. So we were kind of brainstorming of ideas to do with, like defining moments or like cultural kind of touchstones and stuff from the decade. And I was thinking in the food space, and I just thought that Pret seems to be the one, especially in London, like this ubiquitous thing that you really can't escape. It's obviously changed a bit now due to COVID, and Pret's reign seems to be over a bit. But yeah, I was kind of just thinking about that and doing a bit of research, and I felt like I hadn't really read the kind of oral history of Pret, really. Like, even though they are so popular and there's shops everywhere, like you don't often see that many stories that interview people who work there or kind of get into the heart of how that business works. So yeah, that was kind of the starting off point, and I quite like stories that have lots of different elements to them. And I think this one was interesting because it involved going to like the Pret head office, which was really surreal anyway, because it's just quite a strange office, going to their test kitchen, and also interviewing people who actually work there. So it was like a whole range of kind of voices and things going on. So it was really fun to do.
Can I ask a really kind of geeky magazine writing question about that, which is about the first person strand through that? So I was interested, in the kind of how that story was structured. In that, it's kind of, there is a genre of this thing, like the profile of the unsung British institutions. So that the long read of The Guardian did Aldi and stuff like that. I think it's a really interesting form. And I was interested that you have this fairly consistent and pretty sort of strong first person through that. Is that the Vice kind of requirement of voice that Rachel was touching on earlier, or did you decide that was the way to do it? How much of that was you thought like we need to do this in a Vicey way, and how much was it that you just felt this was the approach that the subject merited?
Yeah, I don't think it's so much a requirement that every Vice story needs to have a first person, but I think the requirement is definitely that there needs to be original reporting. You have to like go to where the story is and really bring people along. So I think with this story, because it kind of starts with me going to this really mad Christmas Christmas sandwich launch party that Pret did at one of its shops in central London. So that kind of event, to go to something like that, it would have maybe felt a bit dry or a bit removed, I think, to not have that first person element. Like, I think you kind of need to see it through someone's eyes. And the same thing with going to the test kitchen as well. Like, you kind of want to know, what is it like to sit and try this new vegan egg mayonnaise sandwich that hasn't come out yet? And like, what does it taste like? What's it like sitting there? Like, you kind of want to have that personal element to it. But at the same time, I don't think with a Vice story, we never want that personal element to take over too much if it's something that you're reporting about Pret and like the phenomena of Pret. It's not just about me going and enjoying a sandwich. Like, you have to have a balance there. And I think because it is in that kind of magazine-y style as well, it kind of works because, it's like the kind of long form narrative style of writing too. So I think it works for that piece. And there are loads of other examples of on the site of other people who've done that kind of style as well.
I love that after all the test kitchen sort of, not shenanigans, but experiments, I guess. It was like the chicken Caesar baguette is still it's still everyone's favourite, or the tuna mayo or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Despite all their best efforts.
Yeah, which I feel like says a lot about, what people like to eat.
Definitely. How long would you take to work on a piece like that?
Yeah, it's kind of difficult to say because I guess as an editor, you have a lot of other things going on as well. I mean, obviously writers do too, and freelance writers definitely do as well. But I guess my responsibilities, to like commissioning other stuff and, doing edits on other pieces mean that I might have just like worked on it for a few days and then had to do some other stuff for a few days. So it's hard to say like how long in total that piece took. I think from memory, it did take a bit longer because it took a while going back and forth with Pret and having them say that, yes, I could come and I could bring a photographer, and then changing dates and all of that kind of stuff that happens. And I think it took me a while as well to like source the people that I wanted to speak to, because some of the people who worked there were worried about speaking to the press. So yeah, it can take a while, I think. But definitely when we're planning stories and commissioning stuff at Vice, we're always like aware that if we want to get these kind of good stories with good access, then sometimes they can take more than a week. So we're happy to kind of let writers take a bit longer if they need it.
And who edits you?
Yeah.
And I suppose as a follow-up to that, what was the process like? How many? I know this is again really geeky process stuff, but it fascinates me. How many drafts did it go through? Did you file an outline beforehand? Did you try and get a kind of clean first shot at it? Like all that piece. Given that you are the managing editor.
Yeah. So I would have pitched that piece kind of in the same way that everybody else pitches their pieces, to be discussed by. So Jamie Clifton, who's the editor-in-chief, he kind of, I guess, has final say over what we're commissioning and all of that kind of aspect. So yeah, he edited this piece as well. I think it had, I can't remember how many kind of changes it had. I think it had a few changes, obviously, before we published. But yeah, Jamie would be the one to edit my work. But yeah, in terms of like the average number of drafts a piece might go through, I think if it's a long feature that someone has written, like whether they're on staff or a freelancer, I think it would be normal for there to be at least one round of edits, or discussion about maybe you need to change the intro slightly, or can we bring this voice more to the fore, that kind of thing. So I think that would probably be the average, but obviously with longer and more complex pieces, it can take longer.
Everyone needs a good editor.
Yeah, definitely.
Which I say as someone who frequently sees my own work turned into much better than it was when I found it. Would you ever do a follow-up piece, given the sort of threats to Pret's ubiquity, as you mentioned?
Yeah, I think I haven't thought of that until you mentioned it, but yeah, that's a good idea. Maybe I'll mention that to the rest of the team this week.
Back to the test kitchen.
yeah, I want to go back. No, yeah, I think that could be interesting. I think like generally in food right now, there's lots of interesting stories to be said about, previously very powerful like institutions that are now less powerful. Like Pret is definitely an example of this. It kind of shows you how, you assume that something is just going to be around forever, or that it has enough money to kind of just, outlast anything. But then obviously coronavirus has changed a lot of that. So yeah, I think a lot of our stories are focusing on that kind of stuff now. So maybe, yeah, I should think about doing another piece on Pret.
Phoebe, can we rewind a bit to your entry to journalism, working for Creative Tourist in Manchester? How did it come about? Like, take us back to the beginning for yourself.
So yeah, I guess I was in Manchester because I went to uni in Manchester. So I did English at uni, and then I was really lucky actually because we had a very good careers department at the university. So basically, in my final year, I think I decided that I wanted to be a journalist. So I just tried to do as many kind of internships as I could in that final year, and the year previous actually, because that's when I interned at Vice. But then, yeah, when I was kind of coming to the end of third year, I went to the careers service and they told me about this. It was like kind of like a graduate program that they'd set up with lots of like local businesses to kind of just put their graduates into like short-term roles with them. So one of them was this editorial assistant role with this like arts and culture website called Creative Tourist. So I applied for that and was really lucky enough to get that. So that was, yeah, I feel like I'm quite rare and quite lucky to have been able to go kind of straight from graduating into this editorial assistant role. And it was great, really. Like, it was a really small team. It was just me and I think 2 editors. And then they had a couple of freelancers as well that they worked with. And my editor there, Susie Stubbs, was just really, really great. And, talking before about having a good editor and having someone be patient with you, that's definitely what she did to me. So she would just, every time I wrote something, she would print it out and really go through in a very detailed way why my writing was terrible, but also in a very kind way. So it never felt discouraging. It was just like, you just don't need to do this. And like, make sure you don't, I don't know, use the passive voice or whatever I was doing. So yeah, that was kind of like my entry point into journalism. And yeah, whilst I was working there, I was trying to start doing a bit of freelance writing as well. So having had that connection with Vice, doing the internship a few years before, I was pitching stuff to them, pitching stuff to people like Dazed and Confused and kind of Clash magazine, like lots of those kind of websites that are also very open to new writers. So yeah, that was kind of like my first journalism role, and that's what I was doing at the time.
You mentioned it being a bit of a minefield for people who are entering journalism, sort of not knowing how to get started. How did you make those sort of first approaches to outlets, and how did you learn to pitch? Was it just sort of a sort of trial and error thing?
Yeah, I think it definitely was a trial and error thing. I think it was really helpful because I was working in that editorial assistant role, and I had done, the internship at Vice, and I'd done like a week at The Guardian as well. And I think I did a week at NME too. So I had like an awareness of, what makes a story, and like, what the mechanics are of like putting together an idea for a story. But still, it was a lot of like emails being sent off and nobody replying and just wondering what I was doing wrong. So that definitely happened. But I think I really learned like the importance of having a unique voice, or like covering something that other people aren't covering. And I think being in Manchester at that time kind of gave me some of that, because obviously a lot of journalism is based in London, but the fact that I was in Manchester, I just immediately had like a different angle to my stories. Like there was something there that maybe other writers didn't have. And then strangely enough, after 3 months of doing the editorial assistant role in Manchester, I decided to move to Australia for a year. So that gave me kind of like another angle as well. And I think that's really when I started freelancing more seriously, because I was able to write for like UK publications, but have this Australian angle. So yeah, that kind of helped as well, I think. But yeah, lots of trial and error too.
As you know, it's a rule of the show that we always ask about money and how it interfaces with people's writing lives. So when you were making your way, doing these early jobs and freelancing and stuff, how did you kind of piece together a living?
Yeah, it's a really important question. So I worked in this editorial assistant role. I think it was only a part-time role. So I feel like it was like 3 or 4 days a week. And that obviously wasn't enough to live off. I can't remember exactly what I was getting paid, but it definitely wasn't enough. So I did that. And then I also tried to supplement that with doing the freelance writing. And then the summer before I'd got this job, so kind of the summer in between like graduating and getting this job, I'd basically just moved back in with my parents and worked in a call center in Peterborough, which was not great, but obviously being able to work and live at home, I was very lucky to be able to live at home and obviously not have to pay rent, meant that I could kind of like have some savings as well, which helped. And then also the cost of living in Manchester is nothing like living in London. And I was still able to live in kind of like a student house. So yeah, there were lots of like factors there that really helped, I think, that might not have been possible if I decided to, I don't know, move straight to London after graduating and tried to start doing journalism here, because obviously the cost of living is just really, really high.
I'm from Manchester originally, and I have friends that
can
rent flats on their own for like half the price of
a
London flat. Yeah, it's ridiculous. What precipitated the move to Australia?
I don't know. I think it's quite an odd move now when I think back, but I think I just, because I'd lived in Manchester for 3 years, obviously at uni, and then I was doing this job, which I really loved, and like I was really torn about whether I should leave or not. But I think I kind of wanted a change really. And I'd done like a study abroad semester the year before, and I'd met like people who I knew in Australia. So there were kind of connections there already. And I wanted to go somewhere where everybody spoke English so that I could try and get internships writing in English. I'm sure there would have been other ways to do it, but that was also some of my reasoning. And then I managed to like set up some internships there as well. So that kind of pushed me to go. So I lived in Brisbane for a while, and I worked for I did an internship for this music magazine, and then ran out of money, and I was a copywriter for this company that sold solar panels. So I did lots of weird stuff kind of alongside doing like the freelance writing as well.
Can we talk about Munchies and your sort of way in to Vice through that, and maybe a bit about kind of food writing in general, which is an area which we've had Jay Rayner on, but also it seems that it's an area where there's quite a lot of kind of interesting innovation going on with food bloggers and stuff like that. What was your experience of that?
Yeah, I think that really came about, like I was saying, when I moved to Australia and I suddenly had this kind of new angle. So yeah, I was in Australia, and I think the time when I was there kind of seemed to coincide with the real trend for, suddenly everybody was really into eating out and really into coffee. And obviously in Australia, that culture is even more, like even stronger. Like there's a really big culture for food and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, when I was living in Brisbane, and then I lived in Sydney for a while as well, like there just seemed to be so many food stories presenting themselves to me. And there were also lots of like local food blogs there that would also commission me to write. So I kind of fell into food writing that way, and then realized whilst I was doing it that there were so many ways to write about food. It wouldn't just be like a restaurant review. So that kind of took me to Munchies, really, just by pitching freelance ideas from Australia. I think one of the first ones I did for them was about this cafe that it was basically like a pay as you feel cafe. So you could kind of go along, and it was run by volunteers, and you could pay whatever you felt the meal was worth. So the whole idea is kind of like fostering community and giving people who maybe don't have as much money a chance to have a hot meal. So yeah, that was a really fun story to do, because I kind of interviewed the founders and things like that. And yeah, I kind of created that relationship with the editors at Munchies, and from there wrote quite a few other stories for them as well. So then when I eventually decided to come back to the UK and the Munchies editor role was open, I already had that relationship there. So kind of applied for the job and was really lucky to get the job. So yeah, I think that it kind of shows how freelancing can be really good to develop those relationships too.
I noticed that on the Munchies sort of section of the website, there's obviously articles, but there's also videos and sort of interactive things about food. Do you think there's an expectation with the sort of next crop of journalists coming through to have those sort of multimedia skills alongside writing, or do you think it's still fairly sort of siloed?
I think it's definitely helpful. Yeah, I don't know, I still think of myself as, purely editorial, even though I have, I've helped do production on some Munchies videos before, and, I'm always interested in like other ways to kind of bring our stories to life. But yeah, I think it's helpful to be able to at least know, what goes into making a video, or what goes into producing like a podcast, or like, would this story work better as, I don't know, would it work better on like Instagram stories instead of as a written piece? Like, I think it's really useful to have all of those skills kind of, at least an awareness of them as a journalist. But I don't know, I think the most important thing, if you kind of want to have this kind of role, is it's more important just to have an idea of, how to tell a story, like what makes a good story, how you can structure a narrative. Like those are kind of the core things that, if you've got those down, then you can apply that to making a short film, or, thinking about how to include photography into a written article in an interesting way. Like, I think that's the most important thing.
A few years ago, there was a lot of coverage, this was sort of during the broader Me Too movement, but about Vice and the non-traditional workplace clause and so forth. Does that still exist? Or has there been a kind of change in the culture of the organisation in the time that you've been there?
Yeah, the non-traditional workplace clause doesn't exist anymore. And definitely the Me Too kind of allegations and the information that came out was obviously really like not a great time for anyone at Vice. And I think the company has committed to like a lot of changes since then. And, the workplace culture is now definitely different to how it was in the time that was described in the New York Times article and in the other pieces that kind of came out. So yeah, I think the workplace culture is definitely improving at Vice. Like we have a really strong union on the for the editorial team and the production team, which has been really great to see that grow in the last year or so. And that's definitely, I know that's made me feel really really connected with my colleagues and really supported by the people I work with. And it's hopefully something that we can kind of like grow a bit more in the coming years as well. But yeah, that's obviously something that's like part of Vice's history too. So yeah, that's something that we have to be aware of.
What's the sort of vague, or as your best guess, gender balance at Vice?
I think it is. I don't actually know the numbers, but I think it is pretty even. I don't know. Just thinking about the editorial team, I feel like it's quite even. But yeah, I don't have the exact numbers to hand.
And when you mentioned the work experience program you had before, obviously that's been kind of disrupted by COVID, but when that was happening before, did you pay people, and how kind of formalized was that? Were you something you applied for? Was it like people's mates and relatives being brought in?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't kind of a friends and relatives thing. It would be something that everybody, to my knowledge, who came in sent an email in, asking about work experience, and it wasn't somebody that we knew beforehand. So it was very much like open to anyone. So in terms of how we paid people, so when we did kind of the longer 3-month internships, so those would be paid positions. I don't know the exact amount that people were paid, but they were paid. And then for the shorter placements, so like 1 or 2 weeks, because that was just a work experience placement and not considered like an internship, people would be reimbursed for like food costs and travel costs. So that's how those schemes worked before. We're trying to think of ways to kind of support people like during COVID as well, and we're in talks to kind of set up a mentoring kind of scheme with one of the unis we work with. But yeah, right now it's really hard to think of a way to make an internship or a work experience placement work for people when we're all kind of on Google Hangouts together. So it's a bit hard at the moment, but it's definitely something that we want to do in the future, hopefully, if things go back to normal or if we can figure out another way to do it.
Yeah, I think onboarding is one of those things that's really difficult to do remotely.
Yeah.
As we're sort of coming towards the end of our time almost, could you tell us a bit about how you moved from Munchies to your current role? Was it one step, or was there a few sort of steps in between?
So yeah, I'd been in my Munchies role for I think about 3 or 4 years. And then internally there were a couple of kind of restructures with how the team was kind of managed and kind of laid out. So the managing editor role became available, and it was something I applied for. And obviously it was a bit of a promotion, but yeah, I was accepted for that. So it wasn't too many steps in that sense. But I had kind of been at Vice for a number of years then and had been doing lots of different stuff on Munchies. So I feel like I could like demonstrate things that I'd done just working on this one vertical that could kind of move into Vice more broadly. But yeah, it's been really fun to kind of move into the wider Vice team while still like getting to commission food stuff as well.
And as a final question, where would you like to go from here? What are your ambitions for your writing and also for, executive positions and stuff like that?
I don't know. I'm always really stumped by the 5 years from now question. I feel like I have a really like limited imagination, but I don't know. I'm really like happy in my role now, and I feel like we're doing really interesting stuff on Vice. I guess I'd like to think of ways to grow the team. It would be really exciting to get more people on board, although obviously it's hard like in any journalism job, but especially in like the COVID climate. But yeah, I'd like to see kind of like, more people joining the team and potentially like exploring that area, and doing more writing too. That's definitely on my list as well.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Phoebe. This has been very informative, and all the best with all your ongoing endeavours.
Great. Thanks so much.
Cheers, Phoebe.
Hello, it's us again. Simon, what did you make of our interview with Phoebe?
I really enjoyed it. It was another one we did remotely, but I think, touch wood, that we're finally getting the hang of some of the technology. So hopefully it should sound a bit clearer.
This might be where Katie butts in and is like, no, it's horrible. The audio is horrible.
I mean, it's entirely possible that we've recorded something that's completely unusable, but small steps. It was very interesting. I mean, I think it's a site that kind of has a lot of mythos attached to it, and interesting to dig beneath a bit to see what it's like working there. I thought the thing she was saying about, and as you mentioned as well, like how difficult it is just bringing in, okay, you can bring in commission new writers, but in terms of just bringing in new people to a workplace during COVID, like I think that's a huge issue, and one that is obviously only like really raising its head a bit. What did you think?
Definitely. I mean, on that issue, not being in an office and being able to ask the sort of minor questions that would be so easily sorted in 10 seconds, but sort of having to work up the courage to email someone about it. I can't imagine how difficult that would be. But yeah, I really enjoyed talking to Phoebe. I thought she dealt with all of our sort of questions about money and rates and the Vice culture very graciously. And I enjoyed that prep piece as someone who is a devotee of their coconut lattes.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you not find it slightly sort of sickly?
Yeah, I like the sugar, that's the point. And also then I can convince myself I'm being healthy because it's non-dairy milk.
I mean, everyone knows that a vanilla latte is basically quite a dirty drink, but I just think that a coconut latte is like...
Oh, it's got like 100 grams of sugar in it. Yeah, it's really sugary.
Yeah. It's like wrapping the same experience in a sort of veneer of healthfulness. Rachel, I saw that you brought up your Manchester origins just in case they weren't clear from your broad Manchester accent as well.
I held off for at least 30 seconds before I mentioned it.
No, it's more like sort of 30 minutes actually. And I do think, I mean, Phoebe reached out to us actually suggesting she'd like to come on the show, and I do think that she's clearly and they institutionally have made a sort of genuine investment to bringing on new people, and new voices stuff, which I think is actually very admirable.
And I think the lessons were the same though. You have to, if you're working anywhere, you have to do all the reading and all the research. You know, it's the same as any other workplace. So in some ways, I thought that was quite a valuable lesson.
Yeah. We didn't ask how old she was. We should have asked. Maybe is she past
Is she what?
older than 30? Past the age where you have to be taken outside and like sent to the knackers yard advice.
No, I'm glad we didn't. I think that's sort of crossing some sort of Rubicon.
Yeah, there would have been a slight banjo there. I did though know this woman who's no longer in London, but she was working at Vice and she was 29 and genuinely like somewhat apprehensive about what was going to happen when she like went over the hill. But you know, I'm sure they're welcome to it all. I kind of wanted to know like who was the Scott Mills of Vice, like, you know, the guy who's like been there for a very long time doing sort of youth focused content. But again, maybe best we didn't ask that.
I think also, you know, she couldn't have outed her colleagues. I think that would make the return to the office quite awkward. So yeah, I told everyone on this podcast that you were over the hill. Sorry.
You're too old. Maybe Vice should do like an old people vertical though.
Yeah. Let's see if they take that suggestion on board.
Yeah, don't ignore us, please, there, Phoebe. I thought it was a really interesting episode and great to have her on. Rachel, what have you been up to? You're currently in. Can we say where you are?
Yeah, I'm not a sort of undercover agent. I'm in Spain on annual leave, which, you know, involves just reading and sitting by the pool. I'm enjoying it a lot.
That is quite, well, not the pool, but just reading or watching things is a central facet of your professional activities.
I'm actually reading the Lovecraft Country novel. Some of our listeners may be aware of the HBO adaptation of it on TV at the moment, because I'm hoping to profile the screenwriter.
Okay.
How about you, Simon? What have you been up to? You've been sort of traversing the British Isles.
I know, my grand tour. Well, I've escaped the Premier Inn. I was in a Premier Inn deep in the British countryside on a glamorous magazine assignment, which I've now returned from. But then I had to work all weekend or something else. I'm just really exhausted. And I think I find, but what is very challenging being a freelancer is sometimes having to try and do 3 different things at once. So like I was doing that story. So I was out reporting, which involved sort of standing in fields, looking at tractors. And then I was writing a draft for this 1843 piece and then doing a bit of copywriting work and stuff, which is fine. But it just meant you were like getting up at 6 every morning to like do something quite difficult and convoluted. And then, you know, I find like there is a sort of emotional labor cost to reporting because it's like you're on all the time, you know, you're with people and stuff like that. So I haven't had all of today off, but I've had the morning off. So I went for a sort of bimble through Brockwell Park and some brunch. Well, I tried to get some brunch, but all the bruncheries were closed. So I got sort of...
Bruncheries? Is that the official term?
Yeah, there are numerous ones in my corner of South London. So that was good. And then I'm sort of back at work tomorrow. So yeah, and I think things are good, but I just feel I'm just juggling a lot of balls at the moment.
Mm.
What's going on with your course, by the way? Have you had more stuff for that?
That's ticking along, and I am doing some work for that while I'm on holiday, but it's very enjoyable, so I don't mind.
Excellent. Well, this has been Always Take Notes, hosted by me, Simon Akam.
And me, Rachel Lloyd.
Our producer and social media editor is Katie Lee. Our graphic design is by James Edgar, and our score is by Jess Danheiser.
If you'd like to follow us on social media, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Always Take Notes, on Twitter at Take Notes Always, on Patreon at Always Take Notes, and if you'd like to leave a review on iTunes, please do.
Many thanks. Goodbye.